Shadowrun is a tabletop role-playing system that takes place in the Sixth World, a dystopian corporate hellscape where the chaos of magic reawakening was capitalized on by corporations that only grew more powerful and more ruthless with time. So it is pretty much real life but with elves and dragons in it. In the year 2012, when the Mayan calendar said the world would end, it did! Or rather, our world as we know it, the Fifth World, ended. With 2012, the magic came back, bringing stuff like spirits and dragons with it, and a bunch of people turned into elves, dwarves, orcs and trolls. Suffice to say, it was all quite a bit confusing for everyone involved. The absolute chaos and being proven to be more than backwater savages was promptly used by the Native Americans to nuke the continent with a magical volcano and form their own nation. Mexico went back to its roots and adopted the Incomayan aesthetic as the nation of Aztlan, despite the fact that most of its bigwigs are actually of Spanish descent and the local natives are still as oppressed as they always were. International corporations have extraterritorial rights and became nations of their own, willing to dabble in the morally dubious for profit and power. It's that kind of setting. Definitely more cyberpunk than fantasy, because while magic and spiritualism play a huge role in how the events pan out, you won't find a paladin in here. If you wish to do the morally right thing, you will have the world trying to stop you. But isn't that what makes good deeds truly worthwhile? The players played the role of Shadowrunners, which is a poetic term for deniable mercenaries that have no official ties to their employers and usually work for whoever's paying without ever getting to see the bigger picture of their actions. In game terms, it's not really that different from being adventurers if you consider corporate compounds to be dungeons and your GM really likes throwing twists and turns your way. Then again, D&D goblins probably can't call for support from different offices or use the outright unfair material advantage they have over the party by throwing tanks and helicopters at them. But why am I saying all of this? Well, there are two reasons. One, I think it's extremely easy to look at the outset of Cyberpunk, but you can play an elf and go, wow, that's dumb. I sure did that when I was younger. It is extremely tempting to take this setting at a face value and just treat it as a cheap pad job of sticking D&D and Blade Runner together, gluing tales of heroics and brave deeds to a setting where anything true and beautiful was bastardized, copied and sold. It just doesn't seem to gel that well. And yet, it does. Magic does what plain cyberpunk cannot, and vice versa. Racial tensions as we know them today may change with time, or at least God I hope, but the analogy of orcs and elves being different and persecuted can persist. True shakers and movers don't need to be hyper-powerful mages and beings to keep up with all the bullshit power scaling. They can just have so much money that they have entire nations in their pockets. If you really want to go over the top, they might also be a dragon, which serves to further sell them as viewing other beings as beneath them. Pawns to be used. Technological augmentation done for cynical reasons strips away the connection between your body and soul. But what else can you do when that's what gives you an edge in the extremely lucrative and competitive field of career crime? The elements of both don't clash, they work together to weave a bigger whole, setting up extreme cases of many cyberpunk and fantasy genre questions. Reason number 2 is because Shadowrun is incredibly, absolutely goddamn cool. The entire setting has negative amounts of chill and it reminds you of that simple fact every step of the way. Like, as an example, I wanted to run a game in Poland to keep things familiar. I cracked open a wiki to learn a bit about the country in Sixth World and oh, would you look at that, Auschwitz-Birkenau is the equivalent of a magical nuclear crater because of all the pain and suffering that happened there. And I think this example is indicative of what Shadowrun as a setting actually does. It drags the elements of reality would rather forget and ignore to the forefront and escalates them. The power of international corporations combined with how competitive they are turns them into a circus full of sociopaths. The previously oppressed get empowered in all the worst possible ways with the return of magic that can be just as vicious as it is wondrous. Nuclear fire and pollution outright get spirits that embody them. Earth is the only place rich in mana, which landlocks the interests of all those powerful enough to take meta-humanity outside of it. Science gets a whole new dimension of immorality given to it with stuff like experimenting with blood magic or forcefully ripping souls out of bodies, and so on and so forth. If there is one issue I have with this setting, it's that it is extremely America-centric. The default campaign backdrop is Seattle, and many places in the world are more of a job destination for one mission than actual developed backdrops of their own. It makes a modicum of sense due to the fact that the developers of these games are themselves American, not to mention the ultra-capitalist reality of this country, even to this day, if not even more so than in 1989. But if you want to do some running in your own country, you probably will have to do some legwork on your own. Poland gets it really rough, and it's either assumed to still be a Russian satellite or just gets conquered by them in Euro Wars again, depending which version you look at. Either way, it's an impoverished fuck of a state outside of most corporate interests. Yet, I still love this setting, and I want you to try and love it too. So let's just get down to all the ways it can be experienced that I recommend. Tabletop. This is probably the most obvious one, the OG. Tabletop role-playing games, in case you don't know, are improv acting. Each player is a main character in the story, except for a single one called the Game Master. They are the director, describing scenes and playing every single other character. But, since this is improv and letting the heroes always succeed is boring, an element of chaos has to be provided by the game mechanics. Dice rolls, mostly. Well, that and bad decisions made by people at the table, but that is a constant. Shadowrun has 6th edition. First one came out in 1999 and the latest one just last year in 2019. What you get is very much dependent on the version and the times that informed it. Early editions can feel very retro-futuristic with Bowie haircuts everywhere and the Matrix, or internet as we know it today, running on telephone cables. As time went on in real life, so it did in the 6th world as well. Whereas the first edition was about the cyber year 2050, 6th deals with the 80s, and the vision of the future becomes much more in line with what we might imagine today. The specific edition also defines what you can do with your character quite a bit. The XP experience points in universe are called karma for a reason, and in the very first edition it was directly tied to doing the right thing. It did get a bit more lax with later editions, so you can absolutely play ruthless mercenaries if you want to, but quite honestly, I think the glimmer of natural light in the dark future makes for a much better role-playing. But hey, you do you. Aside from the core books for any particular edition, which you can get from outlets such as DriveThruRPG or your local tabletop gaming store, you're going to need two things. The first element is dice. Shadowrun doesn't get fancy with that and is content with just using shitloads of D6 dice, the kind you can see in Monopoly and other tabletop games. The other, the more troublesome aspect, is other people. On one hand, I think a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot by thinking nobody would ever want to play with them or that they need to find a group of people that are already playing. Just mention you want to do it and are looking for other players to whatever group of buddies you have, in real life or over the internet. What does it matter in this day and age? Of course, if you are the one coming forth with the idea, expect to do the heavy lifting of being the game master, which involves actually knowing the rules and doing the homework of game preparation. There are pre-made modules and adventures that you can use as a starting point, and shadowrunning jobs are, by their nature, episodic as all hell, so don't worry about planning a grand campaign. Baby steps. Just remember to talk to everyone and make sure everyone's on board for what kind of game you're going to play. Not just the system you are running, but its tone as well. Not everyone can be okay with atrocities in every game, or perhaps maybe someone is just into it for the game aspects of it and doesn't care for the story. Make sure your group is coherent and, at the very worst, can tolerate some scenes not being to their taste. And one more note of advice: if you want to run a narrative campaign about a wage slave trying not to crack under the pressure after they found out some unsavory secret about their employer, don't play Shadowrun. It is tailor-made for doing crimes and is pretty much centered around that very topic. Now, the mechanics of the system have often been described by scholars of tabletop games as a clusterfuck. I am going to expose myself in public and admit outright I have never played Shadowrun as a system. I just took the books, 4th edition to be exact, and ran them in GURPS, because my circle of friends knows that system very well and can do anything with it. The setting, I find, is much more meaningful than the direct mechanics behind it. If it is your first tabletop rodeo, just get Shadowrun books and brace yourself for a lot of snap judgments that may or may not be grounded in the game's actual rules. And of course, even if your plan is to port this setting into some other system, do support the official release and buy Shadowrun books. It's the least you can do to support this wonderful world. Video games. Shadowrun did have a few iterations on them video dingles, and I want to mention some of them. First of all, the one that almost killed all interest in the setting for a bit in the Xbox 360 era. A goddamn multiplayer shooter that has nothing to do with the setting. How? Why? Let us leave such silliness behind. The first two games are just called Shadowrun and came out on Sega Genesis and SNES. The Genesis version is rather plot-light take on the setting. Rather than throw you straight into some crazy conspiracy, it is content to let you choose a predetermined character archetype and tell you, I don't know, your brother got killed, go find out why and get some revenge, and then dumps you to grind randomly generated mini-quests to get enough money to move the plot forward. It is a rather straightforward take and runs mostly on the aesthetics of things. The Genesis sound chip especially provides a lot of atmosphere. Having played it for a bit, I can't say that I particularly like it, but it has its charm. The SNES version is a bit better remembered because it gives you a main character with a face. Jake Armitage, you know, like the guy from Neuromancer who has a cool name that everybody loves to reference but who is actually super lame in the book proper, wakes up in a morgue with no recollection on how he got there while countless hitmen are trying to off him the moment he steps out. While this is no Planescape torment, the mystery and people hellbent on killing him send the poor chammer on a search to save his own skin. The fun thing about Jake is that he is a total munchkin. To let you interact with every aspect of the universe, Armitage is a decker and a shaman of dog and handles his gun pretty well. It would totally not work in tabletop, but hey, it totally works for the purposes of the game. The other thing that doesn't quite work is the fact that it's a point-and-click game on a SNES pad. It is about as seamless as a patchwork tablecloth. Still, it is a game with a lot of soul and ideas on how to approach the setting, so do check it out in any form you can. I do prefer it out of the two from the few hours I got in both. As I was writing the script, I was also informed about a third game that was just called Shadowrun for Sega CD. It is a Japanese-only release that combines visual novel style with an adaptation of the tabletop mechanics. Sadly, I do not speak Japanese, and a quick search for any proper translation projects makes it look like any efforts towards making an English version happen failed, so I don't really have much more to say about it. It looks cool, and I hope I will be able to play it myself someday. In 2013, a game studio called Harebrained Schemes tried to bring Shadowrun back to the computers. Kickstarted as Shadowrun Returns, the project was meant to be a sort of a Neverwinter Nights for the setting, a perfectly moddable basis that would let the fan community create their own campaigns and share them. While the project did not have the widespread success of its D&D counterpart, it did successfully manage to revive the idea of Shadowrun video games, and Harebrained released 2 more titles in the series. Let's discuss all 3 in the order of release. Deadman's Switch, the scenario added to base Shadowrun Returns, is as vanilla as it gets. The story about finding out who killed your old buddy, cause there's money to be made by learning that, takes place in Seattle, has you meeting some of the fan favorite NPCs from the tabletop, and it has no party relationships whatsoever. You pay dudes and dudettes to risk their necks, and the moment the run ends, so does your friendship. That and no hub area makes it a rather short, linear experience. Also, I hope you like the armor you see on the cover, cause you will be wearing it for most of the game. They're really proud of that model. All in all, it's not a bad game, but it's clearly the first one. I would say give it a try, but don't feel bad if you bounce off it. The story is kinda about nothing, thematically speaking, but it is a fun ride. Dragonfall was originally a DLC for Shadowrun Returns, but it was so popular that they polished it up and released a separate Director's Cut edition. And it's a good thing that they did, because this one is easily my favorite out of the 3. In the anarchist state of Berlin, a run goes wrong. What was supposed to be a simple data grab turns into a deep dive into a noir-esque conspiracy that puts your entire team at risk. This time, you do get proper party companions, and great ones at that. An ex-military orc sniper that takes no shit, a 40-year-old punk rocker turned shaman, a seemingly emotionless razor girl with killer hands, and the world's most gullible decker. The story revolves around the ideas of anarchy, power vacuums, and actions done in blind hatred. It is a great game, and if you're only ever going to pick up one of the games suggested in this video, pick up Dragonfall. Hong Kong is the last one of the 3, and it takes place in, predictably, Hong Kong, or rather the Kowloon walled city. You start not as a runner, but as a perfectly normal civilian with a SIN and everything, but of course it doesn't take long before you and your foster brother get that ripped away from you, and you are forced to work in the shadows as you try to discover who fucked you over and why. This time your party consists of My Brother Cop, Rat Girl, 4chan Child, superior Slavic ethics, and a goddamn zombie samurai. The story deals with much more mundane themes, at least compared to Dragonfall, of class divide, exploitation, and the good old Shadowrun flavor of the supernatural and the mundane horrors mixing into one. Being set in Asia, the game does some interesting stuff with concepts like Qi and Feng Shui, letting you experience a different spiritual take on the world than what you could experience before. It is a fantastic game with great characters, just one that drags a bit and is therefore not as cohesive and tight as Dragonfall. If you do play it, remember to load your complete save file to play the epilogue story they added after the game's release. Not only does it acknowledge your choice at the end of the main game, meaning you can absolutely play it as someone who joined forces with the main villain at the very end, but it also ties up some loose ends of that story's plot that fell by the wayside when the main conflict escalated. It can be easily beaten in one day of play. For the purposes of this video, I recorded myself playing a Dragonfall mod called Shadowrun Unlimited, which gives you an open world Seattle to, well, Shadowrun without limits, going from job to job, getting in trouble and moving up in the world. It does what it promises to do and has some cool systems like out of combat skills. However, I have to admit I have not played any other mods to Shadowrun Returns. If you have played any of them and you do recommend them, please let me know in the comments. I am very much inclined to play more. Just good stuff, please. Literature. There are 46 Shadowrun pulp novels and I have not read a single one of them. Some of them got translated into Polish, but not many, and I didn't get the chance to get my hands on any of them. A quick glance through Goodreads shows that they are all apparently pretty okay, but not exceptional. If you have read any of them, please let me know if you recommend them. It will be a bit before I get down with my audiobook backlog, Dune especially, but it's been a while since I've read a full novel in English. The one piece of Shadowrun literature that I've read and can wholeheartedly recommend is called 2D's Shadowrun Storytime. Initially it was a tale of one player complaining about another, but it grew into a full-blown dramatization of the campaign, probably the most famous one that does not involve professional voice actors. In the far future of the year 2070 something, meaning its 4th edition of the game, 4 morally dubious Shadowrunners decided to work together. They are 2D, literally a fortune meme. Dervish, murder machine destined to become the symbol of America. Geppetto, literally Satan. And Trout, who would rather be called Deadman, but he was bad at his job and didn't get to keep his cool street name for long. What started as a tale of horrible player character that made terrible choices every time he opened his mouth was enjoyed by TG community so much that it soon evolved into a proper telling of the party's shenanigans from beginning to their explicitly final job, taking them all over the world and crossing paths with several powerful world figures. The party is mostly black hats that don't shy away from work no matter what that work entails, but they're an entertaining bunch of assholes, especially as the game shows them acting differently in different scenarios. Except for Geppetto. Geppetto is fucking scum and deserves every single second of suffering he endured and way more. As the game goes on, some characters in the party change and the story moves forward, but I can safely say all of them got a moment to shine in the campaign. As it tends to be with tabletop games, there isn't much of an overarching story or themes to it. Story structure probably comes closest to an episodic TV series, but it is a great episodic TV series of crime, danger, and plans that never work the way they were supposed to. I know for a fact that I'm not the only person that thinks so. The tale was so popular that you can pick a character portrait that looks suspiciously alike to Dervish in Shadowrun Hong Kong. Be advised that it is a sausage fest, not a single female player character in sight, and that does carry some narrative weight, especially when it comes to the tone of the story. Whether you get me and the boys doing crimes or oh god this really is from 4chan out of it is up to your interpretation. You can either read the TG archive of the threads, a Google Docs compilation of the tale, or you can listen to a text-to-speech device read it on YouTube. I'll link all 3 versions in the description. Sadly, the closest we got to Shadowrun on TV was Bright, and Bright fucking sucks. I hope it didn't poison the well for generations to come, because I would gladly see a cyberpunk urban fantasy TV series, especially with modern CG and direct-to-internet methods of broadcast. At least, I hope we get something before it turns out that Sixth World is really in 2021, considering how fucking apocalyptical 2020 has been so far. If you dive into Shadowrun setting as a bystander, I hope you enjoy it. If you decide to play it with friends or on a computer, remember, watch your back, shoot straight, conserve ammo, and never, ever cut a deal with a dragon.